Welcome to this episode of This is Scotland, and it is our special Q&A edition. Hi, my name is Coinneach MacLeod.
Hello, I'm Ally Heather.
Good to see you, Ally. How are you?
Absolute pleasure to be here, to be honest. Really loving how well the podcast's going. Doing when you release these things into the world, you never know how they're going to be received, but it's been great to hear all the positive feedback.
You're right. I was a bit nervous, but it's so actually. I'm listening to them in the car, and I listened to one when I was walking last week as well. And particularly the Q&A ones are so much fun. We're getting so many fantastic questions. But do make sure not only to send in your questions, but please subscribe to the podcast as well. It means so much to us if you do click that subscribe button on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. So do give us a follow in that way. But let's get on with the amazing questions that we've got today.
So we've got stacks. The mailbox is like genuinely like dozens and dozens and dozens of questions each week. But so what I thought I'd start with is one from Minneapolis, from a gentleman by the name of Eric. Feel free to give us your full name. I love it when we know where people are as well. But Eric in Minneapolis says, I know Scotland shares a lot of history with Scandinavia, especially through the Vikings and the Northern Islands. But how similar is Scotland today to its Nordic neighbours?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. And I suppose what I would maybe say is today, as opposed to the past, we're not a Nordic country, but I do think we feel like we share a northern soul. Would you say, Ally, with our neighbours to the north?
I think there is there is just an act of being north that gives you a shared experience, like the long summers, the deep dark winters, the quite low populations and quite a lot of space. Like these things are shared, and those fundamentals do connect you, I think.
Yeah, they do. And I think maybe even though politically or socially at the moment where we have slight differences to Scandinavia, our culture, our emotions, I think that's where really we start to feel really close. And I was trying to find like some connections, and I know it's obvious to talk about maybe Apelia, the kind of Shetland kind of fire festival, but I was looking at maybe more social things that connect our countries together. And a few of them really did stand out. I suppose for me, firstly, the support of the minority languages. Of course, in Scotland, we have Scots and we have Gaelic. But we, further north, we have Faroese and the Sami languages. And even, I suppose, Icelandic could be classified as a minority as well. So I think the fact that we do have languages that are only spoken in our areas is fantastic and something to be really supported. But one thing that myself and Peter are very passionate about has a real connection to Norway as well. In Norway, they call it hytte, Hytte, and this is very much the kind of cabin life of Norway. They can be very simple or very luxurious cabins in the mountains or the forests. And let's put this into context. Scotland's lifestyle is called hutting, the hutting lifestyle. And there is a campaign that's now called 1,000 Huts for Scotland. Okay? Now, to put that into context, currently in Norway, there are 483,631 hytte. So there's a hytte for every 11 people in Norway. So it is absolutely about simplicity, fresh air, that real Nordic belief of landscape being good for the soul. But this culture of hutting in Scotland, it is a Scottish tradition, probably the most famous ones, during the kind of First and Second World War, when the soldiers came home, many of them were given a small plot of land outside of the cities. Carbeth is probably one of the most famous Scottish examples. It's a community of around 140 huts. Then you've got the Hebridean culture of the Aries, which is the summer dwellings, where particularly on Lewis, families would head out to the Sheelings in the summer so that the villages could recover and, just be ready again for the animals coming back. So I really support this kind of concept of using our own land. And that's a bigger question, of course, Ally, in Scotland, is who owns the land. But if there's one recommendation, Peter, my partner, wrote a fantastic book called The Art of Hutting, which is out, and that really gives you the history, the stories, all those things of the Scottish lifestyle of cabin life, which we spend a lot of time on our off-grid cabin. There's one other that I wanted to highlight, though, and that's social care.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that long ago, 2017, that baby boxes were introduced into Scotland. There was a pilot on Orkney first, and it was very much about this Nordic idea. It came from Finland, this idea of giving every child a fair start. And doesn't that seem an obvious thing, Ali, to talk about, but it's actually so rare,
Yeah, no, it isn't. It's that thing of the baby boxes. I know are very well received in Scotland, but the new mayor of New York is adopting them and bringing them to New York now.
Really?
Yeah, and he's credited specifically looking at Scotland and Finland, their practice, how it's worked, and giving children a fair crack.
You're listening to This Is Scotland. We'll be right back.
Ali, where in Scotland would you disappear to for a week?
If I've got a week, Orkney. There's so much to do.
That's the thing about Scotland. There's always another story to find.
Find yours in the Scots Magazine every month.
Subscribe today at scotsmagazine.com.
It is something genuinely inspiring and really good that connects us, and there are deeper connections than that. Kind of like governments visit each other all the time to see how we teach and how different curriculums take place and things. But the baby boxes is like the headline connection, isn't it?
It sure is. They started in the 1930s in Finland, and there was a few reasons why. It was the state provided these kits of clothing, but particularly things that they could make themselves. It had things with cloths and, but the box itself was turned into the cradle for them as well. But it really encouraged prenatal health care, because to receive the box, mothers had to attend a clinic or go and visit their doctor before they were 4 months pregnant. And so it helped mothers to know what was going on in their body. Their doctors knew they were pregnant, and it really made a huge difference to mortality rates in Finland as well. So when Scotland brought this on, I found that really inspiring, and I think it was not only a success story in Finland in the 1930s, I think it became a huge success story in Scotland in the 2010s. And now there are little sleeping bags and nappies and picture books and, I think it's cloth nappies as well to be more environmentally friendly. And if that is the kind of thing that we can look north and get inspiration from our neighbours, isn't that the best thing ever?
That's it. I think so. My response to that question would be, if you boil it down, how similar is Scotland today to its Nordic neighbours? There are huge cultural similarities, but at the kind of the state level, there's been dissimilarities for a long time. But as Scotland starts to make more of its own decisions, we are looking and learning a lot from our Nordic neighbours, which I think is a really useful position to be in. As we build our little state up, it's good to have their homework to steal from.
Well, a good point, and actually some people hopefully have managed to tune in to the TV show I do on the BBC, Hebridean Baker, Nordic Islands, and in one of them...
I think we call it the award-winning TV show you do.
I can call it the award-winning TV show, thank you, Ali. Yeah, it has done well. The Fortnum and Mason television programme of the year, in fact, which was amazing. But when I went to the Faroe Islands, I nearly came away... I don't know if I was envious was maybe a word I could use of the Faroe Islands.
Yeah.
We face a lot of depopulation on the Scottish Islands, or very much a change of population of who is living there. And in the Outer Hebrides, people call us remote. We're not really that remote. We're not that far away. I mean, and making it relative to the Faroe Islands. But what the Faroe Islands have done, which is very inspiring, is made it a place that people want to stay. Accessibility is one of the biggest parts of their strategy. I hope I've got this right, that 10 of their 11 main inhabited islands are connected by undersea tunnels, one which is over 11 kilometres long. There's a roundabout, halfway through it to split to two different islands. To put that then into context, that's the same distance from the islands of Berneray to Harris, which would connect the Outer Hebrides together, which would be phenomenal to be able to do. You can fly to Paris, you can fly to London, you can fly to Edinburgh, to New York, to Tórshavn in the Faroe Islands. From Stornoway, you can fly to Inverness, Benbecula, and Glasgow. So just making the connectivity, so people feeling that they're not far away, they're part of the global storyline.
Yes.
So I think it's one of the biggest questions we can learn from our Nordic neighbours and the island communities is how do you keep young people, jobs, schools, housing and services in these small communities. And I hope we can learn a lot from what is happening in the Faroe Islands.
Totally. Like, it's that thing of because we compare ourselves so often to England, France, Germany, and we are much weirder than them, and we can say, oh, of course things are different here. We're so far away, there's hardly any of us. But there's only 300,000 people in the whole of Iceland. That's the population of the Highlands. Why isn't the Highlands as economically diverse, as connected as Iceland? Why not?
Yeah.
And Shetland is quite rightly pushing now for undersea tunnels, like you talk about, to connect up its main islands, to improve their connectivity and try and halt depopulation and make it a better place to live. I personally get a little bit claustrophobic, so an 11-kilometre undersea tunnel, no thank you, I will swim. But I think there's still a lot to learn. Hey, we better move on.
Okay, well, I've got a great question for you from Nick Boyle, actually. It says here, why does the Scottish diaspora have a much lower profile in the US than the Irish diaspora? And can and should we try and change that? That's a fascinating question.
Well, so I know Nick. I met him. He was out visiting. He's faced Scotland, but lives in New York now. So hello, Nick. Thank you for your question. It was lovely meeting you. It's a great question. So why does the Scottish diaspora have a much lower profile than the Irish? Well, first of all, that's the same reason there's Irish bars all across the old British Empire. It's because they were ghettoised, because they were Catholic, because they were seen as less educated, because in the mad old days, we thought there was racial differences between Irish people and lowland Scots and English. So they were kept separate, and they had to kind of build their own self-sustaining communities and systems of mutual support. And for the Irish, that naturally formed a pub where you could go a lot of these Irish pubs would operate as labour exchanges where Irish folk would help each other find work. They'd operate as almost childcare centres, and they operated as proper community embassies for Irish diaspora. Similar, I think, to what you saw with the Italian restaurants. That is where the Italians naturally clubbed together, and because they were outsiders. And I suppose you could say the same about gay bars and things like that, where people that were seen as outsiders had to build their own supportive communities. A gay bar is more than just a place where gay people drink. It's ideally it's a kind of supportive place that does much more than that. It builds a community. So for the Scottish, I'll speak about Protestant Scots first and then about Catholic Scots, because when you were founding the Americas, that sort of sectarian divide was huge, and it really mattered if you were Protestant or if you were Catholic. And basically, Scots didn't form a separate ethnic group as much in the Americas because we were able to enter into the ranks of the middle class and the ranks of the elite relatively frictionlessly. We were able to, from a young age, adapt to spoken English in a way that was acceptable. We were able to, we had a standard education, a really high quality rate of literacy, so we were able to go and enter into that. I think I saw a great difference commemorated in art when I was in Philadelphia. There's two huge bronze statues next to each other. One commemorating the Scottish migrants, one commemorating the Irish migrants to Philadelphia. The Scottish one has a handsome man leading out, striding ahead with his beautiful young wife and their handsome son and handsome daughter at their heels. And they've got shoes on their feet, they've got nice outfits, and they've got a big, beautiful dog. I don't know what kind of dog it is, but I know that you and Peter are the dog experts, so it'll be some sort of...
check that out.
It's a big... And that is the story of, we are farming people, like we are tenant farmers with knowledge, clothes on our backs, education, and we are intentionally coming to this new world to go and make a go of it. The Irish one is a nightmarish scene. It's remarkable. It's kind of sloped. So at the bottom, the lowest end, it's like a long hill that rises. At the lowest end is a graveyard full of starved corpses commemorating the famine. And these graves and empty graves and starved old ladies in rags. And then you have, leading up the hill, this kind of parade of sick, ill, driven off people leaving Ireland behind, getting on these dangerous ships and going to the new land. And there is something huge about the fact that the Irish came as poor refugees and had to find themselves a system of self-support. And I think that it was the exclusion and then the sheer numbers of Irish that helped form that kind of identity. There is also the idea that the Irish diaspora is a bottom-up celebration, where it's people with Irish connections, often working class, often lower class, and they have the bars, like their culture tended towards bars, so that is a party. So when people are celebrating Irishness, it came from the bottom up, whereas things like Tartan Week, celebrations of Scottishness, again, we show our connections with the elite in that was made a public holiday by senators and the president. It wasn't demanded from the people, it came from the top. So I think there's a huge difference there between people creating a party around Irishness and then that being officially sanctioned, whereas Tartan Week and things coming from upon high and being given to people. So I think what we have to do, Nick, Coinneach, myself, and all the other Scots with an interest in America, is rebuild those connections and showcase what it means to be a Scottish American and what connections there are between Scotland and America. So I think we just have to keep building it. That's all.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head regarding the difference I see between Scottish and Irish celebrations, I guess. What's interesting for me is, I'm so lucky to be able to visit the US, and particularly the Highland Games scene, the interest in Scotland. I think it's at a all-time high, to be honest with you. We're nowhere near comparing it to the Irish diaspora, but the passion, going to Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, or I'll be at Virginia Scottish Games this autumn. It is amazing to see tens of thousands of people resplendent in tartan and kilts and celebrate in Scotland. So you're absolutely right. I think there's still lots we can do, but I'm really proud every time I go to the US and see what they're doing there. I think again, we're comparing ourselves to Ireland, but if you, again, compare ourselves to any other country in Europe and the relativity of that in the US, and we are absolutely up there. So, yes, hard to compare ourselves to Ireland, but definitely we can stand proud against any other country in Europe.
And that's it. My mate's got the opinion that because a lot of Americans can't tell the difference between an Irish and a Scottish accent, the Irish are sweeping up the credit that we get for being lovely on our holidays. But let me ask you something. So thank you so much again for your question. This is now Margaret from Toronto in Canada. And she said, I saw old photographs of Glasgow's Empire exhibitions. Spectacular buildings, pavilions, vast palaces. They looked amazing. So where did they all go? It's a really an interesting question. I don't know anything about this.
I love this question, and I remember when I moved to Glasgow first, I remember there was an exhibition about this at Kelvin Grove, and this all comes from this thing called the International Exhibition of 1901, and it was in this kind of tradition of the Victorian age. There was the Great Exhibition of London in 1851. Glasgow held another one of these in 1888. But I think 1901 for me was probably the most iconic. It was held for 6 months, 2nd of May till 4th of November 1901. And it created this fantasy city in Kelvin Grove Park. They built palaces, domes, towers, pavilions. There was an electric tram, there was restaurants, there was foreign villages, there was gondolas going up and down the River Kelvin. I think it was 11.5 million people visited this exhibition for the 6 months in 1901. It was a phenomenon. It really, really was. But what many people will see are these huge, iconic buildings that were made for this exhibition. The main one that it was centered around, which is probably one of the only permanent buildings that were left, is Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum. It opened its doors 2nd of May 1901. That was part of this exhibition because so that was really the center of it. But pretty much all the other buildings around it, and I do encourage you all just to type this into the internet to find these spectacular exhibitable buildings, but they were always built to be temporary. You know, they really were built of straw and, things. They weren't, but when you look at them, they were spectacular. Probably the centerpiece was the Industrial Hall. It was designed by the architect James Miller, and it was deliberately theatrical, white and gold, exotic Spanish, Venetian influences. It had a huge golden dome, 180 foot high, with this golden angel on the top with this electric torch. These buildings were spectacular, to the point there was a competition of who could design the most wonderful buildings. And Charles Rennie Mackintosh actually did put in a few designs, and they were rejected. They weren't exuberant and extravagant enough. There was a Russian village, there was a Canadian village, there was a Japanese village, there was a theme park of roller coasters and water chutes. They even had their own football tournament as well, where obviously if you're going to have an international football tournament in Glasgow, of course you're going to invite Third Lanark, Morton, St Mirren, Queen's Park. But the final, of course, was Rangers against Celtic. They played it at the University of Glasgow football grounds, 15,000 people. But I think probably the biggest draw was this new Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, which is still, of course, one of the biggest reasons to come to Glasgow now over 100 years.
I had no idea about that. Because I love Kelvin Grove Museum, but I didn't know about that. I've just Googled the pictures. That looks remarkable. That looks absolutely incredible. Like, talk about the height of empire.
Yeah, absolutely. It was all about the empire, and it was done at quite an interesting time, because only a few months before it opened, Queen Victoria had just died. So the country generally was supposed to be in mourning. King Edward VII was supposed to open the exhibition, but sent his daughter instead, Princess Louise, who was the Duchess of Fife. That was her title. But it really was positioning Glasgow as this second city of the empire. And look what Glasgow can do. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating storyline. I always wonder, imagine these weren't temporary buildings. Imagine if Glasgow still had those buildings, what a difference it would make. So do check that out, Ali, a bit more. I think you'd be fascinated by it. Absolutely.
No, definitely. I'm really, because I go to Kelvin Grove and I want to know more about this part of it.
Good. Okay, well, I've got one last question for you before we
Please.
finish today. Ewan Ballantyne has sent in a question. I love that you're going to answer this one. I'm intrigued to see your opinion on this question. Said, how important is it to support the growth of Gaelic back across Scotland? He talks about the historical rights and prejudices, but he particularly focuses on the Welsh model. You know, the fact that there's a Welsh-speaking cabinet, a target of 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. So the question is simply, can Gaelic or should Gaelic be the national language of Scotland again? What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think with this, because I've engaged with government about minority languages, Scots and Gaelic, for a lot of my career, and I think realistically it's got to be the art of the possible. It's got to be what can we achieve? Because recently, like, you'll see signs for road signs and things going up around the East Coast that have Gaelic on them. But that's just symbolism, because it's not backed up by a growing speaker base or any kind of thriving speaker community in the towns that now have these Gaelic signs. Highland Council have just said that they're going to change the way they approach Gaelic language, and they're going to really put funding into what they're calling a Gaeltacht. It's an idea borrowed from the Irish, where you specifically fund and support and nurture Gaelic-speaking communities where they are. So the Highland Council have looked at the census data and said, well, these communities have a really high percentage of Gaelic speakers in them. So let's focus all our Gaelic resources and all our kind of all of our available energy into these communities and support the community that is there, and then grow the next generation of speakers. And I think that is the realistic way to grow Gaelic. There's nothing we can do about the past. What we can do is support the present. There are so many Gaelic speakers and there are so many Gaelic activists that need support. And I think building up that is like blowing on the embers of a fire. I think there's no point in trying to start a new fire in a part that's gone out. Go back to those embers that are still glowing very brightly, blow on them, nurture them, fuel them where they are, and then let that fire spread. So I'd love to say that John Swinney says tomorrow, okay, Edinburgh is now a bilingual city, and then half of Edinburgh just speaks Gaelic. I'd love that, but we can't get there by the stroke of a ministerial pen. It's got to come fae the folk. And so I think focusing your resources on education for kids in the Gaelic, evening classes for adults in the Gaelic, culture sessions, music sessions, support for the arts, so that you can live a Gaelic life in these heartlands. Should Gaelic be the national language of Scotland? Look, there's a lot of English speakers here, and you'd be...
Is there?
I'm afraid so. And you'd be taking something away from people. You'd be taking their country away from them if you said, if you speak English, you aren't Scottish. And the Welsh model, no, I don't think it could. I don't think we can follow the Welsh model, because I just don't think we have the speaker numbers and the density of speaker numbers. Like when you're knocking about in North Wales, Abdi and Tesco's is just speaking in Welsh. It's quite rare to have that experience in Scotland, even in the Isles.
You're absolutely right. It was probably the Western Isles that really always happens every day to me, but maybe not elsewhere. I'm going to do one shout out to a great Gaelic organisation before we finish. There is a football club called Alba FC, originally based in Inverness, but now dotted around the country, and they do all their football coaching in Gaelic, and I'm really inspired by what Callum and the team are doing there. So a big shout out to all community organisations who are supporting Gaelic in, as you say, the things that we do, be it singing with the Royal National Mod or sport, all those things that just brings the language into just our environment, which I absolutely love.
That's it. It's got to come for the grassroots. But wait, that's us. We better wrap up. Thank you so much for all of your questions. They're so interesting. I love getting a chance to dig into these big issues. So thanks to Nick and Ewan for the questions you sent to me, and to Eric and Margaret. Questions coming from all across the world. Thank you so much. Remember, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it, and get your questions in for our next Q&A sessions.
Great. Okay, we'll speak soon. See you next week, Ali.
Cheers.
Cheers.